G'day. If you're the sort of person who cannot buy a pattern for a t-shirt because you're just not the size that they go up to, this is a good place to start. This is a purchased t-shirt, and last time I changed the angle of the shoulders so that they would suit my shoulders, and I added the fabric for a bust dart. Let's see where we go from there. Here's my first iteration of making a t-shirt from the pattern I made from the previous one. The sleeves are a bit tight. I'm not 100% happy about where the bust dart is, but it's a wearable muslin, and it's a t-shirt I've now got available to me to wear, but I'm a little bit further along in adjusting my pattern. Let's have a look at the next one. Here's my next iteration, and it's easier for you to see what's going on, but it's not as comfortable. And why is that? Because this fabric is not as stretchy. When you are doing a pattern from something that already exists and it's a stretchy fabric, try and get something that is at least as stretchy for you to make up as the original garment was. Otherwise you end up with things like this. The arms are too tight, and there's definitely some areas in the back of this that are not super comfortable. I can probably get away with wearing it if I either make the sleeves short or perhaps if I just make it into a sleeveless top. But is it going to be worn as a long-sleeved shirt? Probably not. Here's my original sleeve that I worked out. Now that I've discovered it's a bit too tight down here and also up in this bit, I want to widen it a bit. The easiest way to do this, if there's not a huge amount of effort to make, is to run a slit through the middle but stop at the seam line. So I've got a piece of extra interfacing underneath. It's 4 inches wide. That's just convenient, and I drew a line up the middle of it. Now what I'm going to do is open out that there, same on each side. That's now added a bit over a ½ an inch there. It's made no difference at the top. It has made quite a bit of difference at the bottom, so I might want to change that at the bottom. The important bit, as far as I'm concerned, is getting this bit right, because that's where the comfort is in a sleeve. It's in the biceps. The change in my sleeve shape, sleeve head shape, is so minor it doesn't matter, but it has given me extra in my upper arm, which is what I want. Sleeves and armholes go together. So the armhole from the parts that I had previously matched this sleeve head. And because I haven't really changed the length of the sleeve head, it will still go into that armhole. Where you run into problems is if you open this out at the top and add a big bunch at the top, and maybe you need to, then you are going to start having to change the armhole. You can certainly widen things, or you can take them down wider. I've known people to be very, very big in their forearms because they're rock climbers, and that part of their body just gets bigger. If you don't take that into account, garments end up being uncomfortable because they're too tight. Find a pattern that is as close to your bicep as you can get. If you need extra, this is one way to do it without having to muck around with the shape of the sleeve head. It's added ½ an inch or more in the bicep, which is where I want it. It has added extra at the bottom, but I can take that out if I need to later. Now here's the back of my garment. Here is a copy of the armhole. I have a sleeve. I have an armhole that it fits into. The trouble at the moment is that this original pattern, where the sleeve starts, is actually off my shoulders. So essentially this has become a dropped shoulder shirt. Not because I want it to be, but because my shoulders are just not broad enough for it. It is one of the ways that people end up looking like they're in clothes that don't fit when the shoulder seam comes down low. So what I'm going to do now is to lift the shoulder seam back up to where it ought to be at the top of my shoulder. But I need to start the armhole this far in so that it's the right width for my shoulder. I put that there. That will be bringing in the side. I don't want to do that. I need to pivot out until this matches up with the side seam. What does that mean? I'm going to be cutting some off the top of the armhole, and I'm going to be adding some on. So that's my new armhole. Now I have to do the same with the front pattern. So I've got a separate piece that is the right size front armhole, and I need to take it to where it needs to be on the shoulder and pivot it out so that it will take some off the top of the armhole and add some on underneath. So now I bring the top of the armhole to where I need the shoulder seam to end, and then I pivot the armhole around until it carries on up the side. The front armhole is now the same length as it needs to be for the sleeve. The back armhole is the same length that it needs to be for the sleeve, but we have rotated them a bit so that the shoulder width is correct. Once you've made those alterations to the front and back, so I moved, in my case, the armholes in to my shoulder and splayed them out so they still hit the side seams, I can cut out the back, the front and the sleeves. Now I need to sew a dart, but we haven't really got a place for a dart to be sewn, or at least not marked the way it is on a normal pattern. So what you're aiming at doing here is working out how far it is from your shoulder down to your bust point, and we're going to fold at that point. You can play with this over iterations of a t-shirt. In order to sew my darts, I've folded them straight along the line where I think I want them to go. I have pinned along that line so things are not going to move, and I'm going to simply start sewing 1 inch out from the fold and stitch into where I've got that pin. I've got that pin at 5 inches from the edge. I've got my fold for the dart up against the 20, and I've got it on a fairly large stitch at the moment, and I'm coming closer and closer to the edge. When you get to the edge, I've got maybe 3 stitches to go, try to stitch along the fold rather than going straight off it. And you can see there, it's a gradual move off the fabric. And I can take this and hang it in front of me and see how they're looking. If it's not going far enough, I can just extend it a bit. Once you've sewn the bust darts, it's really no different putting an adult t-shirt together than a child's t-shirt. Sew the shoulder seams, do some sort of a neckline finishing while it's still in the flat, sew the sleeves in while it's still in the flat, and then the side underarm seam. I've still got to do a few hems, but this is not just a wearable muslin, this is a good shirt. And remember, all of this stuff, you can keep iterating as long as you like. Once you've got the basic shape made, start playing with your necklines and what you want to do. Do you want to make them bigger? Do you want to make them smaller? Do you want to put collars in? What sort of things do you want to do with your neckline and with your shirt? This turns out to be a really good way of getting a pattern. If you're on the bigger side and you don't have any patterns that work. Find something that fits you, maybe sort of down to your waist, and then put some cuts up to your waist that allow the fabric to hang, so you can work out what this part needs to be like to fit you, and then work under that to make it big enough to fit. I hope you've learned something from this, and I shall see you next time.